This is What's Wild in New Hampshire by wildlife biologist Eric Orff. Well, I can barely see him now. He's a long ways away, but a beaver was just here at roadside. Well, for a little ride this rainy afternoon. He was over there, right on this side of the road, chewing away, and I spooked him. And he dove in and went under this road through the culvert and came out on the other side. Yeah, always nice to see a beaver. And, as the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department's former fur bearer biologist, I kept track of trapping of beaver and otter and mink and all those animals for most of my 3-decade career at the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. So, kind of kept my eyes on the fur bearer population over those decades and before. And here I am, a decade and a half out almost from my retirement. So yeah, I'm still paying attention to what's going on with our fur bearer population. As I have said before in some of these, that the fur prices are down substantially. Historically, they've been very cyclical over the last several hundred years. They'll be down for a while, then up for a while. This is nothing unusual. Right now, fur prices are so low that trappers pretty much have stopped trapping most things. I mean, a beaver pelt might go for $5 and a muskrat for $1, and even a fox is not very much, or a fisher, $25 or so. I think that's the last figure I saw. So, but looking here, we have beaver ponds all over New Hampshire. And guess what? 100 years ago, there were no beavers here. And by 1900 in New Hampshire, beavers had been extirpated for over 100 years in most of the state. So by the time the settlers settled in New Hampshire and built all these stone walls we see, most of them were built by 1820. 1810 to 1830 was the heyday of the sheep industry here, where there were a million sheep and our forests were cleared. But even by then, before then, the early settlers and trappers had basically killed and ate everything. They did. Year-round, they hunted and trapped and ate what they could get and sold the furs. So there were no regulations for 200 years or more, and things were gone. But by the 1930s, there were enough beavers in New Hampshire, so some of the Fish and Game early folks transported some from the one small population on the northern border of Canada up in Pittsburgh, and they transferred them down to, I think, the central part of the state, like Holderness. Well, beavers took off. And when I moved to New Hampshire in the early 60s, almost all the beaver ponds were new. They had just returned to much of the state. In fact, talking to an old trapper when I was the fur bearer biologist, he remembers as a kid or teenager in Henniker, so that might have been the 1940s or even 50s, that when a beaver moved into town at this farm, the farmer charged a dime to go look at the beaver dam. That was the same price as going to the movies. You could go to the movies or go see the beaver dam. Same price. Very rare into the 40s, 50s, and early 60s when beavers came back in great abundance. In fact, I think well into the 60s, there was a limit on how many beavers you could take a year. So they were essentially just coming back by the 1960s and into the 70s. And most of the beaver ponds in southern New Hampshire, central and southern New Hampshire, were pretty new. That's no longer the case. In 1979, when pelt prices were very high, you could get $60 or even $70 for a single large beaver pelt in 1979. Trappers that year took over 6,000. So big year, 1979, 78, 79, by trappers taking 6,000 beavers. And that year in 1979, because fur prices were so high, a fisher pelt, a female fisher pelt, would go for over $200 a pelt. That year in 79, fur prices in New Hampshire were up, and the trappers in New Hampshire, there were fewer than 1,000, sold the fur for about $750,000 that year. Now it's something like $20,000 or $30,000, if that, a year. So fur prices are way down. Trapping effort is way down. Numbers of animals trapped are way down because they're worth nothing to the trappers. And in fact, beavers and some of these other animals, by far more, are captured as nuisance animals. Unfortunately, when are nuisance beaver captured? In the spring. So you don't trap them in the fall when they have some value. Trappers get upwards of $100 per beaver when they trap them in the spring when there's young in the den. Makes no sense to me. You don't trap them in the fall when they're worth something. You trap them as nuisance animals in the spring when there are young. But that's the way society is today, I guess. Just have to live with it. But this, so watching this beaver, he went under this road that I'm standing on, this culvert right here, and swam the length of that canal or stream as far as I could see. So yes, beavers are back in good numbers. I think something like 2,000 are trapped a year now, or even less than that, as during the fall, and they are more than that, taken, no doubt, as nuisance animals. So yeah, beavers are back. And when the beavers came back, so didn't everything else. You know, I think I read in more than one publication that something like 70 to 80% of all wildlife in New Hampshire spends part of their life cycle within, I think, 100 or 200 feet of a wetland. Beavers have brought back songbirds and ducks and geese and mink and otters and fish and turtles. Yeah, they have created habitat for all these other animals across New Hampshire and across the Northeast. So beavers are our engineers that have brought us an abundance of wildlife here in New Hampshire and across New England. Yeah, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. You've done a good job. I appreciate the hard work that you do constructing these dams. In fact, this dam that backs up to this road, many years ago, while I was at Fish and Game, I worked with Murray Fay, a wildlife technician. His job over the summertime was to install beaver bafflers. Basically, it's a three-sided box about 30 feet long that you actually carve out a little notch in the dam and put this three-sided box in it, and it baffles the beavers. So you can draw the water level down by a couple of feet. Back then, this road was not as high as it is right now, and when the beavers backed up that dam on that side of the road, it flooded this road that I'm standing on right here. So I assisted Murray Fay, bless you, Murray Fay. His full-time job over the summertime was taking care of beavers by installing beaver pipes or pulling debris out of culverts so the beavers did not have to be killed over the summertime. Fish and Game protected beavers for a long time, and for 30 years over the summertime helped reduce conflicts with beaver so they didn't have to be killed. We grew the beaver population. Yes, we did. So everything has benefited from having more beavers in New Hampshire. Moose, certainly another example. So yeah, sure do enjoy spotting a beaver whenever I can. They are a wonderful species here in New Hampshire that were gone for nearly 200 years, and now they're back. As I have said before, it's the best and worst of times. There's a beaver in every ditch, a moose on every highway, a deer in every garden, and a bear in every bird feeder. So yes, it's the best and worst of times. We have more wildlife in greater abundance than since before colonial times, since the early 1700s. We literally have more wildlife today than we've had in nearly 300 years. And a lot of that is thank you to the beavers. Yes, thank you, beavers. This is wildlife biologist Eric Orr for What's Wild in New Hampshire.